Hello and welcome to another edition of Latina Life with Jenna Malena. Today's Super Latina is an award-winning celebrity chef, an entrepreneur, an actress, and an author. She left the legal world for the culinary world, where she celebrates her Afro-Cuban roots. She's the current host of TV One's Culture Kitchen. Welcome to the show, Chef Bren Herrera. How are you?
Hello, ladies. Thanks so much for having me. I am well.
Oh my gosh, it's so great
good
to
to
have
be
you.
here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here.
And thanks for rallying, because I know you're healing from a recent, bout.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's get, right to it. I understand that you were born in Cuba and then you moved to DC. I think you were a little young, but what do you remember? Do you remember anything about being in Cuba, or did you guys go back, you and your family, to kind of solidify the Cuban roots as you were growing up?
Yeah, so I was born in Havana, and I don't remember anything, quite honestly. I left when I was 17 months, or my family were political refugees. So we left when I was 17 months, and my father's side of the family is Jamaican. So we went to Jamaica first, and we were there about 2 weeks trying to get our paperwork legalized and in order, et cetera, in order to make our entry into the US. So naturally, the story goes for most Latinos, or specifically Cubans, we went to Miami first, and my grandparents were there. So we landed in Miami, and we were there about 5 years. And I do remember Miami very distinctly, even though I was very young. I remember living in Kendall, and things like specifically remembering my father teaching my mom how to drive. I'll never forget. I don't know exactly where we were, but I remember it being nighttime and doing kind of like donuts and circles in a parking lot, and just being really excited for this journey and experience. I remember when we became naturalized also. That was really fascinating. And again, I was 5 years old, I remember. And I remember having to actually get on the stand and raising my right hand and pledging. And now as an adult, I look back, and I've never actually told this story publicly, actually. But now when I look back, I'm like, wow, how can a 5-year-old possibly get on a stand and plead to, or read or recite or whatever.
Right.
But that's really most of my memory in Miami. And then also my very, very first childhood friend, or my very first friend as a human being that I remember, they were also Cuban. And I'll actually be seeing her in 2 weeks. She lives in Boston, and her parents and my parents were very, very good friends from Cuba, from elementary school. So it's kind of like this multi-generational legacy thing. So I remember that family distinctly, and my mom was a caretaker, and I remember having a little blue Smurf car. That's a lot of my memory of Miami. And and one last thing, and this will be interesting because it kind of ties into food. My mom had a really good friend named Gloria, and Gloria was from Colombia, and they used to make these papas rellenas filled with picadillo. And I remember watching my mom and Gloria make these and stay up very late at night making these papas rellenas. And then they had this little cart. It wasn't even like a truck. It was a little food cart, and they would post up on, I don't know what corner, and sell these papas rellenas con picadillo. And yeah, that's all I really remember about Miami. And we ended up moving to DC because my father was a political journalist. At the time, he was the sports editor of El Miami Herald, which is one of the biggest papers in Miami. And then he got a job with Radio Marti, which a lot of Latinos probably are aware of. It's an organization under the State Department. And so that's what brought us to the DC area. And I've been here my whole life.
Wow. And still there.
My whole life, yeah. And still here. I did live in Atlanta for about 7 years, between 2006 and 2012, or about 6 years. And I have gone back to Cuba, not as often as I'd like. And that's a whole other conversation that I really kind of want to explore in conversation with somebody. But I've been back twice formally to Havana to visit with my late grandmother and my tia, who's still there. And then I went back on the first inaugural flight with JetBlue. It was a big pomp and circumstance media event. So I was invited by JetBlue to be on that flight. And that was really special, but I didn't stay. And we flew into Santa Clara. So I didn't get to go to Havana.
Right.
And that was a long time ago. Yeah.
It's so hard. Like my parents, I'm a first generation here. My parents are from Mexico, and growing up, we used to go back like every summer. Like that was my summer vacation. That was my summer camp. being with my cousins,
Oh, fun, yeah.
Tijuana, I was there, that was close, obviously only 3 hours away, or if we're able to fly to Guadalajara where my grandmother, was. But now I've had kids, you kind of
Yeah.
get rooted to like everybody
Yeah.
else's schedule, right? So, I mean, it was I could count on one hand, a couple of fingers, how many times I've taken the kids down, and it's definitely
Yeah, I
hard,
believe it. I believe it. Yeah.
right? So I totally feel you.
Well, with Cuba, it's a little more complicated because obviously the US doesn't have a formal relationship with the US. So, and the political situation in Cuba is such that if you left Cuba after a certain year, you have to travel back as a Cuban citizen. So in essence, you're relinquishing your American citizenship. So it becomes a little tricky. And I fall in that category. So traveling back and forth, depending on the administration, whether it's GOP or Democrat, you just never know.
Right.
So when I went, the 2 times that I've formally gone with my mom and my sister and my auntie, with my another grandmother, that was under Clinton, but I haven't gone since. And then again, when I went with JetBlue, Obama was president, but that was because he was doing a lot of diplomacy and trying to really open up things with Cuba at the time. Right. But it just kind of depends on who's in office and what's going on. But it's generally not as easy as somebody in the US of Mexican descent to go back and forth to Mexico. We don't have that flexibility.
Yeah, no, it's very different. And like you said, I mean, it's such a big conversation to have. I know it's a topic.
Oh my God, yeah.
We want to get into.
So I think because of that, my parents made it incredibly. They prioritized making sure that we celebrate the culture at home and that we are just as Cuban as we are American. So, that meant that the food, the dancing, las telenovelas, que si la comida, que si, tú sabes, el hablar en español en la casa. Like we weren't allowed to speak English in the house because my mom was like, oye, en la casa solamente inglés o español porque van a aprender inglés de todas maneras cuando estén en la escuela. So it was a really dynamic situation that I didn't know that was dynamic. I just knew that that's what it was. Like we were only allowed to speak Spanish at home and then English out when we were in school and with our friends or whatever. And I'm so thankful for that. Like I can't explain to you how that was probably one of the best decisions other than leaving Cuba. That was probably one of the best decisions my parents made, was to instill in us this really profoundly deep sense of orgullo de ser no solamente Latino, pero también ser, or específicamente ser Cuban. So yeah, I'm a Cuban 1,000%. Like, sometimes they're like, "Oh my gosh, where'd you learn your Spanish? It's so good." I'm like, "Oh my God, I didn't learn English until I was 6."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh my God, that is amazing. I do know, because it is so difficult, especially for people like our parents who immigrated over, right? Because I know in LA, and we've had other guests on as well talking about the different things and how, who learned Spanish when, if folks feel like I didn't. I learned English first. My parents just felt, because of, they were growing up here in LA, schools are in English, they don't want me to fall behind. That's how they didn't learn until I went to my grandmother's house. But in Guadalajara, nobody spoke English, and I just learned from telenovelas, and I just went ahead and did it, and it was fantastic, and it was great because you have that connection to your heritage and to the place where like your family comes from. But it is really difficult. I know that some people just haven't. Some of the Latinos we talked to, one of my friends hasn't learned, and it was a sore subject for her because she wished that she knew how to speak Spanish.
Yeah.
And
so we all do. It's 5 of us, and we all speak fluent Spanish and fluent English.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah. And how was it growing up, like, as, a Cuban in Washington, D.C. and speaking Spanish? I mean, was it welcoming? Were there any challenges, like when you were in school?
That's actually a really good question. And again, something that I love these interviews because I feel like I explore a different piece of my childhood in every conversation. But, so my father's family's Black, or my grandfather was Jamaican, and I'm Cuban born, and I speak Spanish. And with the name Herrera, it's obvious. So I feel like I went through this identity crisis because I identified with my Black friends and exclusively. And I don't know if that was a product of the absence of other Latinos that looked like me in my school and in my childhood. Like there weren't any other Latinos that looked like me or my sister. We had Black features, and the other Latinos that were there were Central American. So a lot of El Salvadorians in the Northern Virginia, D.C. area where I grew up. And that culture is just very different. And so funny enough, because there was such a heavy concentration of El Salvadorians, that was my first culinary job, was working at an El Salvadorian restaurant. My brother's 4 children are from El Salvadorian women.
Okay.
So it's a culture that I'm very now intrinsically connected to, but it's a culture that's so vastly different from Caribbean culture. And so that said, in school, both, I mean, elementary, middle, and high school, there just weren't any Latinos that looked like me, spoke like me. And so I naturally, intrinsically gravitated to the Black people. And I felt like when I got to college, I felt like I had gone through an identity crisis because I never really fit in. The Black kids were like, yeah, but you speak Spanish, so you're not really Black. Or the Latinos were like, but you speak Spanish, so you're not Black. And then the white people were so very confused because, you know, at the time, you know, in the 90s, hip hop was like the thing and the cultural, you know, pinnacle of just American culture. And that's what I just gravitated to 100%. And there's just absolutely no question about that. But I spoke fluent Spanish. And when you consider that Black history isn't really taught in schools, there's no real context. And more specifically, because Latino culture isn't taught, and it's taught even less so than Black culture and Black history, there's just this huge misconception and misunderstanding about who Latinos are, and specifically who Afro-Latinos are, and the fact that we look so different. And if you consider that Latin America is composed of 21 countries, imagínate, like there are so many subcultures.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
it was just a really weird time for me. It was just a really weird time. I would say that I got the least love from Latinos. And that was through college and even my early 20s, because again, the Latino population here, it wasn't heavily concentrated with Caribbean people. So I didn't have any Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Cubans, not really here. And so, yeah, there was just a lot of like, you know, there's a lot of misconception around Afro-Latinidad and what Black people look like and what Latinos look like. And it actually, you know, it seeped into my time in Atlanta as well. And that's a whole other conversation, but I experienced that there. But by and large, I would say that, you know, very colorful. Like my parents' home was and remains to be the epicenter of culture, because there's all this culture happening, right? We speak English in the streets, and we, you know, live our very American life in the streets. But then when you come into our home, you know, it's que si la música again, que si the dominoes game at any time of the day, any day of the week, there's a dominoes game going. There's always coffee, there's always rum, there's always food. And so, and we live in a very middle class neighborhood, and we brought culture to the neighborhood, if I can say that. So yeah, it was just a really, really fun, it was a fun like childhood, but it was definitely, I feel now, painted with some questions, or, you know, always having to defend myself. I remember we ended up being really good friends, but a little white boy down the street. When I say down the street, like literally 4 houses, he used to call me and my sister little brownies. And that is so racist. But we were the most brown, blackest kids in the neighborhood. And it was just interesting. Yeah, for sure. It was just interesting.
I mean, you know, it's interesting. You touched on a couple of points, like, you know, one of the missions that Milena and I decided to do this podcast is because we really wanted to create unity within the Latina community, you know. And when I say Latina, I know where there's so many different cultures. I mean, Afro-Latinas, you know, European Latinas, you know, Mexicans different than Cuban and that sort of thing. And it's interesting how some of the conversations we've had have touched on sort of the lack of support and unity, especially within the Latina community.
You know, it's funny. I was literally just having this conversation with my producer, actually, the other night. We were talking about how, with respect to, and I'm going to say this very openly and very candidly. I was saying to her that, you know, and I know that we'll talk about the show, but my journey, professional
Mhm.
journey in the food space, food travel and lifestyle space has been with the very pointed intention to celebrate our culture and introduce the general public to what Latinos are, and specifically who Afro-Latinos and Afro-Caribbean and Caribbean people are.
Yeah,
We are a minor subsect of, or we are a minor subculture of the Latino culture here in the US, right?
right.
Obviously, Mexicans dominate, and it's amazing. But because the Mexicans dominate in this country, Caribbean culture is, and it's Caribbean culture is also very much on the East Coast, right? So like New
Mhm.
York, New Jersey, Miami,
Right.
and a little bit in DC, maybe a little bit in Chicago, which is in the Midwest. But because of that, I find that we are like a subculture. So my intention has always been to celebrate the culture, introduce people to this beautiful diversity in Latinos, you know, ranging from Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. And I've done that so proudly. And I feel like I've done our people and our culture justice.
Yeah.
And then conversely, I will say that in the last couple of years, as I taken my career and the food to a different level where I'm more intentionally and more publicly and more visibly celebrating our culture on this major platform. I feel like I have not really resonated with the very people who I'm trying to celebrate.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm saying this very candidly, just because
Yeah.
it's my story. And we
Right. That's
literally
so
were just having this.
interesting.
We were literally just having this conversation a couple of days ago. I was like, man, like I thought that I would have gotten way more love and excitement from my Latinas, and I will tell you that I really haven't. And it's mystifying to me. It's really mystifying to me.
It is
Yeah.
because I mean, for me, whenever I see, the representation, I mean, that's what's important. You see, like
Right, right, right,
if you see something in front of you, then you know it's out there, then you're gonna
right,
believe it, right? It's like if you
right.
don't see it, then you
For
don't know,
sure.
right? So by
Right.
seeing you and seeing your story, you think that would be opening it up. And it's, what do you think are some of the, you
Yeah.
mentioned this, misconceptions? What are
Yeah.
some of the misconceptions that you've had to deal with?
Mm. Some of the misconceptions. Um, a lot of them have just been really superficial.
Mm,
I've experienced more misconceptions a través de mi mamá, because I speak fluent English, right? And I'm educated
yeah.
here. So I've seen misconceptions through the lens of my mom's experience. So, por
Mm,
ejemplo, my mom speaks English, but she speaks English with an accent, like a lot of, our parents,
mhm,
of that generation, because they came here as full on adults, right?
yeah.
And it wasn't their first language. But I remember where people, being out with my mom, and my mom will speak Spanish to me or my cousin or
Mhm,
whatever. And because I speak to my mother almost exclusively in Spanish, and people will be like, this speak English or go back to your country. Like,
mm,
these are very real things, very real experiences here in DC, which is like the epicenter of culture in the world, because we've got the seat of government here, and you've got every nation represented here, because we've got,
yeah.
dignitaries and diplomats, or lo que sea. But
Right.
so to see that right here in DC is mind boggling to me. And, for me, I celebrate my mom every day, because I'm like, on any day, my mom can speak two languages where the very
Yes.
people who are criticizing her don't.
Mhm.
Right. So things like that. People, the misconception that um, Latinas live off the system, or Latinos just come here to make babies. Like, literally,
Mm,
these things,
mhm.
these are true conversations that I've heard that just baffle me, because these are not just misconceptions, but they're also quite racist. Because in
Yes.
essence, what you're saying is that these people aren't educated. And so they make, these decisions that have the um, consequences. I
Mhm.
can't speak to the statistics of these things, but it's just those, again, those are some of the misconceptions that have, in my situation. I think probably a lot of Latinas can speak to that, or Latinos can speak to personal experiences with misconceptions that people have about us and who we are, and our language, and et cetera, et cetera. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can really identify anything that really I don't think that I can identify anything that really impacted my life other than those kinds of assaults toward my mother. Yeah.
You know, and yeah, and I've seen it. I mean, growing up, it's like I was always the liaison too, you know,
Yeah.
for my parents, you know, as well. And
Yeah.
they learned, you know, Spanish, but of course it's like with an accent. But let me tell you, I can't tell you how many times, and you hear me talk right now, you're hearing me speak. I was born here. How
Right.
many times throughout high school, throughout college, as I entered the work industry and the TV industry, they would say,
Right.
"Where are you from? You have such an interesting accent."
Oh, where are you from? Yeah, that too, right? Like,
Where are you from? I'm
where
from
you from?
LA.
I'm like, well, see, I can actually say I'm from DC because I am. Like, I've been here my entire
Yeah.
life, but I know what people mean with like, oh, well, where are you from?
Yeah, it's like,
Where are
no,
you
I'm in
from?
LA. No, where are you really from?
Where
I'm
are
like,
you really
I'm
from?
from
Yeah,
LA.
from LA. I'm not sensitive to that anymore because I recognize that the general public and most people who are not of an ethnic background just don't know what it's like to be from another country or another culture. So
Right.
I don't meet. My mommy said, "Que te resbale," like let it just, brush it off because these people just don't know any better. And people, I'd like to think that people are curious. So
Right.
but the whole "where are you really from?" like you need to take it at face value. Like if I tell you I'm from LA, then
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
from LA.
I
I
love
think
what
the
your
better
mom
question would
said.
be, "What's your heritage?" Yeah. Huh?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd
exactly. I
rather
love
the
what your
question
mom
be like,
said.
"Oh yeah," my mom's like, que te resbale," like just brush it off and let it slide off your shoulders because they just don't know any better. Um, so yeah, like I don't let those things bother me anymore. People ask me where you from, I'm like, "Oh, I'm from DC." "Oh,
Yeah.
okay, well your last name is Herrera." "Okay, I'm
Yeah.
Cuban." "Oh, well, were you born in Cuba?" I think a lot of people are surprised at the fact that I was born in Cuba and I'm young. They're like, "Oh my God, like you were born in Cuba. So how did you learn your English?" So I do get that a lot. Not so
Right.
much anymore because I'm a professional and whatever, but I do get that. Where did you learn your English? Which I
Right.
think is weird. Like, what do you mean, where did I learn my English? Like,
Yeah.
what kind
Yeah.
of question? Where did I learn my English? Like, we live in America. Like, where else am I gonna learn my English?
Right.
Yeah. I
Exactly.
think that's a really weird question.
So
Yeah.
no,
Or you speak English really well.
really well.
Why wouldn't I speak English really well?
Exactly. Or you're so eloquent, right?
So eloquent. Oh.
But
You don't
now,
sound like a girl from Hialeah. Well, I don't live in Hialeah, but
right.
yeah.
Exactly. So now, I know you said you saw it through the lenses of your mom, but I know you entered the legal world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you get into that? And were there any challenges there or not really? Like, as an Afro-Latina?
Yeah. So that was I knew at a very early age that there were two things I wanted to do in my life, and that was work in law. I wanted to be a lawyer and actually a Supreme Court justice. It was one of I have this picture of like an actual picture of me in the kitchen talking to my dad. Um, I was like 15, 16 years old. And I remember him I grew up in a really dogmatic Christian home. And so there was always, and my father was a political journalist.
Right.
So there was always this, he said, there was always this, not contradiction, but like this battle between, living by this Christian dogma and wanting to be a politician where there is so much other that happens, right?
Right.
If you know what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
I always wanted to be like, my dream was really at least within law, was to be a Supreme Court justice. Like I've always been fascinated by the law. I've always been fascinated by legal rhetoric and the idea that everybody should, has an opportunity to be defended. And just, the structure of that. And I used to watch Perry Mason and I'm like, I want to do that. Like, that's what I want to do. I was just really fascinated by that. And then I loved Whitney Houston and said, I'm going to be an entertainer. Like, I'm going to be on stage and entertaining people. Like, I was very young and I was very clear with the career path that I wanted to take. And so as my dad, a political journalist, and, our dinner conversations were always around Cuba and Cuban politics and, that implication. I was just always really interested in international politics and international policy and law. And so, yeah, I studied politics in undergrad. And so the natural thing was for me to go to law school because, again, coming from these cultural backgrounds and second generation, even though I'm first generation, our parents come here and they want us to be the best at the best profession. So the doctors, the lawyers, right?
Yep, exactly.
It's a very typical and very common narrative for our families. So, and my parents really didn't push that on me, but they supported the fact that that's what I inherently wanted to do. So, yeah, I went to undergrad and then I started law school. I started a law school program in Georgetown and had deferred my admission at DePaul University in Chicago, and ultimately decided that I wasn't ready to actually go to law school and finish. So I worked in law. My very first law job, I was still an undergrad, and I worked for an immigration attorney.
Wow.
And when I worked for this is pivotal here. When I worked for this immigration attorney, she was from Chile, and she was not a nice person. She was so indignant and so rude to these Latinos who had just come here from whatever country they were coming from, El Salvador, Mexico, Honduras, lo que sea. And I just saw how she was so not nice to them, and she would belittle them. And she was very elitist with these people who didn't speak English, but they were going to her for legal counsel on how to become citizens or naturalized. And I was her paralegal, and I learned so much about the immigration process and getting people naturalized in this country and the red tape that people have to go through. There's so much red tape. This was a long time ago, so I don't know if that's changed. But that time period, I was a junior in college, or sophomore in college, that triggered in me wanting to be a voice and advocate for our people, like disenfranchised people. So whether you're an immigrant, a woman, that's really where that interest sparked. And so then, kind of law in general. And I loved working in law. I really did. I did corporate securities for a long time. And that situation was interesting because I worked for white partners who I think just didn't have a lot of exposure to Black and brown people and Black and brown people who were educated. So I'll give, like, my very last job, I was emotionally tapping out from working in law. I was really digging deep into my artistry and my creative spirit and energy, and really wanted to explore music, this whole entertainment piece. So we were in a fiduciary duty case in trial, and I would take my cello to work because we would just have really long nights. So I would take my cello to work to just kind of play and practice in between, whatever assignments I had. And the attorney to whom I reported was just so confused. He was like, "Oh, you play the banjo?" And I'm like, "No, it's a cello." So those kinds of misconceptions, right? Like completely clueless, and just had a hard time visualizing this little brown girl who spoke Spanish and played the cello and went to UVA and was very educated. So that was an interesting time because I knew that I really had this passion for law, and I really knew that I could excel in it. But I was really struggling with wanting to live my dream, and that was to sing and perform and entertain. And when I got laid off in 2005, I was like, I'm never going back to work for these people again, like ever. And I prayed about it, and I didn't have a blueprint, I didn't have a plan, but I just knew that there was something else out there for me. And I just took a big chance on myself, and I did. And I never went back to law, like ever.
I love that you followed your dream. What gave you the courage to do that? Because I think a lot of Latinas sometimes, and I fall fault of that as well. There's that fear of taking that leap and bound and doing something different, really following. So what gave you that courage?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I've never really spent time thinking about it. I just knew that I was such an independent thinker, and I was really driven by this passion for art. My grandfather spoke like 4 languages. He played like 8 instruments and self-taught. He was a composer. My uncle is a concert, international pianist. My father speaks like 7 languages. And I've just been exposed to a lot of culture and a lot of art. And I really wanted, like, it's just innate in you. When you're an artist, it's just kind of like innate in you, and it's in your blood. And I really wanted to explore that. I think the courage, if I had to pinpoint, Probably my mom. I mean, my mom left, and this chokes me up when I think about it because she is such a boss. Like, my mom left Cuba and everything she knew. She left her entire family to support my dad in this wild dream he had. Like, I really get choked up thinking about how courageous she was to embark on this journey and totally unsupported. No, she didn't speak the language. She wasn't educated. My mom dropped out of high school to start this big family, and she blindly believed in my dad and knew that there was something better for us here in the States. But not for my mom believing in my dad and saying, okay. And my mom and my grandmother were like this, like they were peas in a pod, the way that she and I are. So yeah, at 25, she left 25, she left Cuba and everything she's ever known to come start this life. And like, how courageous. And you're doing it under duress, right? Like, you're leaving everything you know, not because you want to, but because you have to. So yeah, if I had to pinpoint, and nobody's ever asked me, all the interviews I've done, nobody's ever asked me that, where the courage came from. But I would probably have to attribute that to my mom. I mean, she's, pretty badass lady.
I love that. And it's, her belief in you too. You probably always knew. And as we daughters.
Oh my God. Yeah. My mom is 100%. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, and that's what we need to do for each other, like believe in each other, elevate each other, and help.
So it's interesting. My mom, mijita, because I will say, and this is for anybody listening, when you're trying to step out on your own and you don't think that you can do it, I'm literally here to tell you that you can. Like, I didn't have any savings. I didn't have any money. I didn't have a plan. I had no idea what the heck I was going to do. Like, I just didn't know, but I just knew that I wasn't going back to law. Like, I knew 1000% with a surety that I was not going to go back to corporate and that I was going to try to do this. I guess in the back of my mind, I always knew that if it didn't work out, I could go back to law school, right? Because I have this foundation.
Right.
But I always said yes to myself. Like, I always said yes to myself. And I was very curious. Like, I asked 1,000 questions and I aligned myself with the right people. But with respect to my mom, when I had these valleys of not having any money, not knowing how my rent was going to get paid, not knowing how my car note was going to get paid, because this was like, these are true stories that people don't talk about enough. Like, I had really, really, really difficult times, especially when I was living in Atlanta, trying to build this brand. And she would be like, mijita, go back to law school, go become a lawyer. Like, you're struggling for no reason. And I was like, mommy, no, I can do this. Like, there's something out there for me. Like, I could really do this. Like, you just have to believe and trust that I will figure it out. And now she's like, oh my God, like, I mean, she is so proud. She is so remarkably proud. I don't think just because I did it, but because I was so and am so determined, right?
Yes.
To do it.
She saw you following your dream.
Yeah, completely.
So how did you pivot then to the culinary world from the legal world?
Yeah. So when I moved to Atlanta, I got laid off and I moved to Atlanta because I was like, oh, I'm going to sing. I'm going to be a professional singer. And I had already started recording an album here in DC. So I was like, if I move to Atlanta, there's a big music industry in Atlanta. And I was kind of tapped into some really big names before I moved down there through some friends and family. And I was singing and I was touring overseas. And when I was starting to realize that the music wasn't really cutting in terms of like paying the bills.
Yeah.
Word, I don't know how, got out that I cook and that I love to cook and that I celebrate my culture through food. And I'm not even lying, girl. This is exactly how it happened. Sin decirte mentira. There was an Asian woman, a Chinese woman in Atlanta who grew up in a Cuban household. Bizarre.
Okay.
Sweet lady. So she very much knows Cuban culture.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact nuances. I don't know if she was adopted into a Cuban family or her step parent was a Cuban person, but she speaks fluent Spanish and, she very much identifies with being Cuban. So anyhow, she told this person about my interest in food and that I cook and that I host parties or whatever. That person invited me to cook on Fox, Good Day Atlanta, on January 1st, 2008. So I was here in DC visiting my family for Christmas, and I got the call let's say December like 22nd or something like that. I had
Yeah.
no online presence. I had like no formal connection to food. But I was like, what? Go on Fox and cook and teach people live about my culture and flan y arroz con gris and rabo or whatever it is. I was like, yes. So talk about being bold and courageous, right? Literally launched a blog, Flamboyant Eats, which is a word play on flan and flamboyant. I launched that blog on January 1st. So I flew back to Atlanta, spent all night January 31st cooking. Had never, ever, ever done TV ever in my entire life. So I was green as all the plants in my home. And I went on TV with a beret on my head. Like the fashion was crazy. And I cooked in somebody else's restaurant. And that literally is what kicked off my food career.
Oh my
So
God, it's amazing.
So then I hosted an event. I was doing, so when I worked in law, I did a lot of pro bono work for people with AIDS. There was a big AIDS problem here in DC or community. And I used to do pro bono work for them. So anyhow, in Atlanta, I used to produce these creative events in support of the AIDS community down there. It was called Creative Cause. And I would have artists out and a whole bunch of market people come out, like a marketplace. And it was a beautiful high-end event. Anyhow, I had a local celebrity MC the event. So when I went to thank him, this person who put me on Fox, she's like, hey, why don't you come out and cook at my home? And that particular dinner party ended up being attended by a whole bunch of media people. And they loved what I made. I made a whole bunch of Cuban food. And then that's when she invited me to go on Fox. So that dinner party turned into the invitation to cook on Fox. And then literally the rest is her story.
Oh, I love it. It's your story.
It's literally how it's my story. It's how it happened. So that was
Chef Bren's story.
January 1st, 2008. And then I got a call from Emeril Lagasse in March of 2008.
What? Wow.
Yeah. So I flew back to DC and I auditioned for his show at the time called Emerald Green.
Oh my
which
gosh.
Which was on this. So this was literally 2 months into my Emerald. Yeah. Emerald. At the time, like Emerald was like, everywhere.
Everywhere.
So I flew back to DC and I got, they cast me and we did an episode called Cuba Libre. And we filmed it here in April of 2008. And then it aired July of 2008. And then after that, everything just really snowballed. And that's when I started pursuing aggressively TV. I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to be on TV cooking.
Yeah.
And it was very bold because I had no experience on TV. I didn't go to culinary school. But again, I was just driven by this passion to really celebrate my culture and let people know that we are so beautiful and diverse and our food is amazing and Latinos can come to this country and thrive and be successful and do really well. And it's beautiful because I get to like celebrate a very American culture, but also a very Latina culture and a very Caribbean culture every single day through food, So
I love it. Yeah.
So that's how I transitioned. Look, I was never going to do food in my life. Like I was going to sing or I was going to be an attorney. Like food was never in the realm of possibilities or even interest, quite honestly. Like I had no interest in food at all, like zero. But yeah, like I went, look, it was thrown on my lap and I ran with it, like literally.
You never know, right? You never know.
You never know. Yeah. And I literally say this, if you say yes to yourself, it will come. Like, it'll come. Yeah.
I love it. Say yes to yourself. And now, of course, we need to talk about your show on TV, Culture Kitchen.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is where you get to share yourself and you and your story. So I know with the second season, it got picked up, right? Second season. Yeah. So I love it. I love the food. Yeah. You amazed
told you that little thing.
Yeah, with your cooking. So tell me about what you love about doing this show and why it's different from other shows anybody else would watch, any other cooking shows.
Yeah. So Culture Kitchen, look, the pandemic was 2020 was like the weirdest year ever. And how crazy that it was 2020, right?
Yeah.
like crazy, right? Like we're in the early parts of 2022, and it's still like 2020 was weird.
I know.
So weird. So to think for me that in 2020, I got a food show. Like I was approached by Powerhouse Productions, my
Mhm.
awesome producers, um, to awesome Black women to celebrate my culture. Like they didn't come to me and say, hey, we want to develop you as talent. This is an idea we have for you. They were
Mhm.
like, we love you. We love what you already do. Let's just package it in a beautiful, formal way and show the world who you are and what you have to offer. And I still pinch myself, honestly, because I'm like, the very thing that I said to myself in 2008, and I went out for, because girl, I can't tell you how many auditions I went to on Food Network, how many
Mhm.
videos I submitted to like the cooking channel, to the travel network,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
so many auditions, so many self tapes, and nothing hit, nothing landed. Um, so when Powerhouse came to me and offered me a cooking show to celebrate my culture and me, and I
Yes.
was my own host, I'm like, this is not like, this is, there's like, I can't believe this is happening. Um, so yeah, like we did Culture Kitchen, and the beautiful thing about Culture Kitchen, and it's funny, like I didn't want that name. I was like, no, like I don't like Culture Kitchen. And my producer will tell you, and Michelle Rice, who's we've become really good friends. She's the president of TV1 and Cleo. We had a conversation recently, and she's like, talent is so funny about things like that, but I know what I'm doing, and they need to trust me that we know what we're doing when we come up with these things. But I mean, they did consult with me, and
Mhm.
now I love the name because it encaptures literally everything that I've been doing for the last 16, 17 years. And that is celebrating la cultura, celebrating our culture. Um,
Exactly.
and I'm really, really proud of the show. I'm really, really proud that my producers, who are not Latina, but are Black women, trusted that I knew and know my culture and that I could do it blindly with their finessing.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so we worked on, my recipes together. Um, but they gave me 1000% creative control. So every recipe on season one and what will come from season two and beyond, it's my food, it's my food, it's my recipe, it's my story. And
Mhm.
they just really gave me a platform and said, this is how we do it, and just do you. And
Right.
literally, it's how it happened. Like we showed up at my studio, and they just let me be me. So everything from like the hair to the fashion to the food to my guests was all me, and they did what they had to do to make it look and sound beautiful. So when you ask, what makes my show different from other cooking shows,
Mhm.
it's really a celebration of the culture and who
Yeah.
we are as
Yeah.
Latinos, and in my case, specifically Afro-Latinos. So I
Yeah.
got to bring my mom on. Like I got to celebrate the very people who have supported this crazy wild dream of mine, and the people who have sacrificed everything. Like my parents sacrificed everything in order for me to be able to do this.
Mhm.
So like my favorite episode was with my mom, like just me and mommy. And then
Mhm.
my second favorite episode was with my entire family. Like how awesome is
Oh,
that? Like how
yeah.
many people really get to say that they get to celebrate their whole family? So my mom, my dad, my three brothers, my sister, my baby niece Sophia. Yeah,
Mhm.
it was awesome. Like it was like I could not have asked for a better first season. Yeah, it was really great.
No, it's amazing. And to see that representation, I mean, I wonder,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
the representation that is not there. I mean, I don't know if you realize like how much of a game changer you are. Like you
Oh,
are
girl, I
breaking
appreciate
ground. No,
that.
I'm telling you, I'm
Yeah.
telling you, girls, seriously, you are breaking ground and progressing the way that our
Thank
community
you.
is seeing, not only
I
as
appreciate
Latinas, but the cultural Latinas from different
it. Yeah.
cultures, the Afro Latinas, the Latinas from different parts of the world, globally,
Yeah.
and here locally. And I feel like I'm seeing that shift. And it was so perfect that these women came to you because they saw that shift too. I don't know if you see it from within, because sometimes when you're
Right.
in it, like when you're in it, you like don't see
Right.
like what's happening around there.
Right.
But there it was
Yeah,
time.
that's a good point, because my lawyer, who's been with me forever, and he's a white guy, but he's from Miami, so he gets us. Like, he's been in Miami and he loves Latinas and whatever. But I have expressed to him for 15, 16 years my frustration with these big networks and the industry just not getting us. Like, they just don't get us. Like, they don't understand Latino people, Black people, Afro-Latinos. So it's like, girl, like, we Afro-Latinos until recently weren't even a thing, right?
Right.
Because you were literally either Mexican or you're Black. Like, there's no like in between, or you're Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
Or you're Boricua.
Right.
And there's a lot of crossover, obviously, but there are so many other people and so many other ways of expressing the culture. So yes, that Rochelle and Sonia got it, and that Cleo got it, and that TV1 got it, and that Michelle got it. To me, yes, it was that time. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And I was also ready. Like, I was literally, because I've always wondered, when is this going to hit? Like, everything that I'm doing has to make sense. Like, the fact that I didn't go back to law school, the fact that I've been struggling so much, but the fact that I've traveled the world and explored food, and I've worked with amazing chefs, and I've gotten to meet amazing people, and I've gotten to learn so much about food and food stories and food ways and the diaspora. I've always wondered, like, when is this all going to make sense? Like, esto tiene, this has to come together. And they got it. And so now I realize that I had to go through all that in order to be completely ready, so that when I was approached to do this, they didn't have to develop me. They didn't have to coach me. They didn't have to train me. Like, I was already ready. So season 1 was like, and they didn't want to give me 16 episodes. They were like, she's never hosted a TV show by herself. And Rochelle, I hope that she'll listen to the episode, but she was like, no, she's got it. Like, B can do this by herself, and she can do 16 episodes. So that's also, when you talk about stepping outside, like, when I do pause to think about what I've done, because for me, it's work, right? Like, for me, it's like, this is my obligation and this is what I want to do. But when I step outside and look at the impact, like, wow, like, they really trusted that I can do what I do, and they knew that it was time. And you're right, the time is now. And I'm happy to be a very loud Latina representing the culture. So, when I like very specific things, like, I wore my hair, one of the headshots that I use, like, I wore my hair picked out and really, really big, because I want people to see that Latinas don't just look like what they look like on the telenovelas, which is most times blonde and light-eyed and very fair-skinned. And I'm not that person. And there are so many mulatas, or I actually don't like to use that word, so scratch that, but there are so many negras. And so many Black women, non-Latina and otherwise, that just aren't represented on TV.
Right.
And I wanted to be very intentional about saying, hey, this is who we are, and we look like we're not a monolithic people, right? Latinos are not monolithic, and Black people are not monolithic. Like, we're so diverse. I speak Spanish on the show. I speak Spanglish on the show. I pay homage to my grandmother, who was Black, and my grandfather, who was Jamaican. So I try to invoke all of those elements that people would see and want to relate to. So if a Jamaican person's watching, like, I want them to feel like I'm really speaking to them, right? If a Puerto Rican person's watching, I want them to know that the mofongo that I'm making is because I have spent time ago. If the Mexican food that I've made, I want Mexicans to watch and be like, that girl legitimately spent time in Mexico and knows the culture. Same for Argentina and Israel, and every country that I've covered. I want people to know that we're educated and we're traveled, and we like good food, and we're successful, and we're professional, and we can do this too. And we, have fun with our hair. And, my hair is not straight. My hair is very curly and big. And sometimes I highlight it, sometimes I don't. Like, right now it's really dark, So I wanted to represent us in a very true, authentic way.
Yeah, and you're doing it, and we're so proud of you. Honestly, and we're rooting for you and supporting you and cheering you on. Yes.
Thank you,
So
and I will say real quickly, like, that's one thing that Cleo specifically gets. Like, they get that women are diverse, that women are beautiful and colorful, and the imagination and the awareness of who we are. We're not just, what media and TV have for so long wanted to portray. And still, look, we're just scratching the surface. There is still so much work to do. Hollywood specifically has so much work to do to bring us into the fold, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
it's true.
the roles and the opportunities still aren't as equitable as they are for our non-Latino and non-Black peers. So I'm here to push
Absolutely.
the envelope and continue, being the face
Exactly.
of, yeah.
Exactly. That's why you're the game changer on that.
Yeah,
I'm just
thank
so
you,
proud
God.
of
Thank
you.
you.
Of course.
Yes, yeah.
Well, listen, bringing it back
Yeah.
to the food, because the one thing too, I think that people might, be surprised about, especially if they're not familiar
Right,
with the background and the different like cultural overlaps. I mean, because you've got
right,
elements of African,
right.
European, Spanish
For
in
sure.
there.
Yep.
I
Todo
mean,
eso.
um is there like a food or a dish you can describe that has like, a good mix of that you're showcasing like on the show, or maybe one of your favorite,
Mm,
dishes that might surprise
yeah.
people?
So one of the things that I was talking to my producer about for season 2 is
Mhm,
like, I want to get more into the Afro-Caribbean, right? So season
mhm.
1, I spent a lot of time introducing. So the point of season 1 was to introduce the audience to who I am, right? And
Yeah,
I'm a food writer who's traveled the world and explores food cultures and food ways through
yeah.
my lens, right?
Mhm,
So a lot of the dishes that I did were my interpretations of things that I've enjoyed overseas. So like I highlight again, like Israel, Argentina, que si Puerto Rico, que si Mexico.
mhm.
So I celebrate or I introduce people to these international food experiences. So for season 2 and beyond, like I really want to dive deep into the culture, right? Like the origins of our food. So for example, black culture,
Yeah.
non-Latino, Southern
Mhm,
culture, um, expresses a lot of background on like yams and certain beans and peas and certain vegetables like okra, right? And
yes.
that's
Mhm,
ubiquitous in Black Southern cuisine. Um, but it's also our food too. So we eat a lot of quinoa, right?
mhm.
Um, we eat a lot of all the beans, actually, every single bean imaginable we eat.
Yep.
We eat all of the root tubers. So like calabaza,
Yep,
um,
yep.
sweet potato, butternut squash, taro root,
Mhm.
malanga, yatue, all those things, right? Yuca. And all of those things have roots in Africa. And so for me, one big missing piece in the African American story is the food made its way to the Caribbean before it came to the United States. So I
Yeah.
really want to get into that. So dishes like um, as simple as rice and beans, like literally as simple as rice and beans, because why do we eat rice and beans? Why is rice such a baseline food in Latin culture?
Mhm,
Well,
mhm.
it's because of the crop in Africa and what they were able to produce. And then that was again brought through the slave trade to the Caribbean. Why do we eat plantains the way that we eat plantains? So, for an example, like in Puerto Rico, they call it mofongo,
Mhm.
so a plantain mash. So Puerto Ricans call it mofongo, Dominicans call it mango, and Cubans call it fufu. And so coincidentally, West Africans call it fufu as well. But
Mhm.
people don't know that,
Yeah.
right? So I really want to dive deep into that. So I made a mofongo on, I think, like the second episode. And I made this beautiful seafood mofongo with like lobster and shrimp and
Mm,
a few other things. So
delicious.
that to me is representative of like Latin Caribbean culture. Um, but I would say probably the chickpeas with butternut squash for me is a recipe and a dish that's very much representative of that Afro Latino Caribbean, because you've got chickpeas, you've got squash, and I try to stay away from pork, so I don't make it with pork, but my mom at home makes it with chorizo,
Mhm.
or ham hock.
Yeah.
So for me, like it incorporates all of those elements of the cultures. Um, and then I just love oxtail. I mean, I have to talk about oxtail because it's oxtail for me was like my claim to fame because I make it in the pressure cooker and it's a beloved meat that used to be kind of like a poor person's food that people would just stick in stews.
Mhm.
Um, so going back to my very first job in food when I worked at Blanca's restaurant which is an El Salvadorian and Mexican restaurant, like authentic, they would use clavo or oxtail in the soups. And now oxtail is like this delicacy that's very expensive. It's like $19 a pound. It's
Yeah.
outrageous.
Crazy.
And so you can enjoy it braised or, stewed or, pulled and made patties into. So I love oxtail. Like oxtail is, girl, one of my favorite dishes ever. Yeah, I love oxtail. And I've played around with a whole bunch of different methods and techniques and flavor profiles and different ways of making it. So like there's a really great Jamaican version that I didn't grow up eating, but I make now. I obviously make a very traditional Cuban version, and then I have different modifications of that. And then other things with oxtail, like sometimes I'll add it to my pho, which is a Vietnamese soup. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, can I tell you, when you're talking about like the deep dive you're doing and connecting all the cultures, I got chills. I got real happy chills like all over. So I'm so excited.
It's so important. And like I use a molcajete to mash up the plátano. And I want people to understand how all these cultures interconnect. So, we go to Mexican restaurants here, and girl, people ask me, what's your favorite cuisine? And I have said 1,000 times, obviously Cuban, because it's what I know and it's in my heart. But true Mexican food is one of the best cuisines in the world. It is ancient. It is rooted in so much history and so much method. And it's so watered down here in the States. So like, where can I find a good sope in DC? Like people are like, sope, what's a sope? Using the molcajete for me is important because it pays homage to how, the ancient tribes cooked. And that was all that was available. You got a big old rock stone that was shaped into this thing, and the mortar and pestle. So I actually collect different versions of mortar and pestles. But the molcajete particularly, or especially the Mexican version, I used on the show to make the plantain mash, the mofongo. So for me, it was, again, my way of just celebrating the cultures and exhibiting Mexican technique, but I'm making a traditional Puerto Rican dish. And that's really important. I feel like if we don't tell the story, then we're just eating food. And I always say, in order to really understand a people and a culture, you have to know their food. And it's such a perfect conduit. And so if you understand the food story, you'll be able to respect the people more, and you'll be able to, who these people are and who the farmers are and who these laborers are who toil to get our food on the table. And it's not just por gusto, and then you're able to enjoy your food so much more because you know where it's coming from and how difficult or not it was to get, on our plates.
So true. So true. Yeah. Well, before we go, I do have to bring up the fact that you've noticed that Malena's not with us today. She's actually under the weather. She's sick. And of course, as we know, all our moms always expect from the Latin culture or maybe the Afro, Cuban culture, there's always something that your moms like give you in order to get you, better. Like what's I guess traditional healing food that maybe you rely on when you're under the weather?
Oh, girl, my mom's chicken soup. No, 1,000%. It is magical. It is, my mom has, I'm not even lying, girl. Like everybody has their thing. But my mom's chicken soup legitimately, truly, authentically, this is validated, saves people. We have a very dear family friend who's very, very, very sick with horrible kidney failure. And he's been very sick for years, like for the better part of his life, and has spent his life in and out of the hospital, undergoing all kinds of surgeries and transplants. And the one thing he always asks for is my mom's chicken soup. And he's always like, Betty, like the chicken soup, literally every time I'm in the hospital, gives me so much strength and energy. Wow. And girl, I vouch to that. Like I was just sick a couple weeks ago and I lost my appetite. And the only thing I wanted was my mom's chicken soup. And I swear to goodness, I swear to the good God who made us all, that chicken soup, girl, it's amazing. I don't even have words. Like that's how.
Okay. Does she have a secret ingredient? What should Malena do? Because I don't know if we can get your mom's chicken soup to her.
Oh yeah, Malena. If I could vacuum seal my mom's chicken soup and send it to you.
No.
So you know, in Latin culture, like we use fideo, right? Fideo are noodles, right? And I don't like fideo in my mom's chicken soup because it takes away from the broth and the chicken and the vegetables. So my mom, she has different combinations, like depending on whatever she feels like making. But typically she's got plátano maduro, so plantain in there. She's got butternut squash. She's got potato. She's got carrots. And if she does potato, she won't do yuca. I prefer yuca. So she's got, and then of course the chicken. But girl, it's really in that broth. It's really in that broth.
And she simmers it. It's all like she puts it all together.
I was like, Mami, ponlo en la presión. She's like, because it'll be done like in 20 minutes in the pressure cooker. But no, she slow cooks the chicken soup. It'll take 2-3 hours. And when she makes a big batch, she'll put out a family text like, oh yeah, hice sopa de pollo. Who's coming over? So by the time I get to the house, she's got like containers and everyone's name on it, you know, for it. And I'm like, hey, I asked for one pot for me. She's like, stop being so greedy. Like I have to serve everybody else. I was like, well, then just make me one pot. But here's one trick I'll give you, Milena, or to give Milena. When if you add, like, let's say you add butternut squash, yuca, plantain, carrots, tomato, onion, and peppers. She'll take like 1 or 2 of each out, a little bit of that broth, and she'll process it to make a puree. And then she'll add that puree back to the soup.
Girl. I'm writing this down. I'm taking notes.
Oh, girl, it is. Actually, I will send you. Send you a link. No, I'll send you a link to an NPR interview that I did years ago, where I talked about how to use these vegetables to puree them and add them to a soup or a stock or whatever. Yeah, it's delicious.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to definitely do that.
And that way you're not wasting anything. You know, you're not wasting the skin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Help her get better for sure.
Something new that I learned, and also a new thing for everybody, which I think we should all take into account in life, you know, business, personal, whatever. Say yes to yourself.
Yes, say yes to yourself, because you will get no's every turn, right? At every part of your journey, somebody's going to say no to you.
Yeah.
Whether it's your spouse, whether it's, you know, your peer, your coworker, you know, somebody's always going to say no to you. Like you're always going to get no, like that's inevitable. And that's part of the journey, but you have to say yes to yourself, period. Like you have to say yes to peace. You have to say, yes, you can. You have to say, yes, I deserve. Yes, I will. Yes, I will walk away from this situation. So you have to say yes to yourself.
Very important. Thank you so much, Chef Bren Herrera. Loved having you.
Thank you so much.
We could talk forever. We'll have to do it again.
Yes, we can.
For sure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, and keep on saying yes, and we'll see you on TV soon.
Buen provecho. Thank you.
Gracias a mis latinas. Adiós y besos. Bye.
Bye-bye.